put it up on our website and have it for you to review later. We have our lead physiologist from CSIO, Melissa Lacroix, with us. And I always get Mel's last name wrong, so hopefully I did okay there. Mel, as I say, works for CSIO, the Sport Institute Ontario. She works with our sport, with our OPSI team, with Alpine Ontario, Ski Cross Ontario, or cross country skiing Nordic Ontario, Wheelchair Rugby Canada, and Beach Volleyball Canada. So Mel's amazing. She's able to help us out in a number of different areas. She has actually a number of different fields that she's an expert at. We're going to bring Mel on to more of our activities as we go forward. But the big part is the education piece and the knowledge piece within this area. Again, just like Kevin yesterday when he presented on nutrition, recovery and recovery techniques were highlighted as a gap by a number of the athletes. So we want to provide this as an initial session, information session on that. And we'll be working with Mel over the next couple of months to build up a little bit of a institutional library in terms of information that you have so it's easy accessible for you to look at. I did ask Mel to before she gets into this session to talk really quickly the difference between a physiologist and a physical therapist, because there seemed to be a little bit of confusion from the Ontario team athletes on that, and then quickly talk about some of the activities, Mel, if you can, of what you're going to be doing with us. So in terms of housekeeping, I'll let Mel decide how she wants, if she wants people's videos off or on. I would say just muted unless you have a question. And then again, Mel, I'll let you, however it works for you, if you want in the chat and I can relate that at the end, or I'll let you kind of run with that. So thank you very much for joining us, everyone. We have 34 people on, and of course, Mel for leading us here.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, I guess in terms of the presentation, if you guys want to, it's up to you if you put your camera on or not, but especially at the end when we start kind of doing some discussion, it'd be great to throw your cameras on so we can all chat. And then throughout the presentation, if you have questions, I'm good to keep it casual. And if you have one, throw your hand up, or Ryan, if you want to kind of just monitor the chat box if there's anything, and just let the person know that they can hop off of mute and just ask away. That's good for me. So as Ryan mentioned, I've done some work with the canoe kayak group here in Ontario that lasted a while. So some of you may recognize me from a couple of different webinars in the past, and hopefully we'll get to do some more stuff in the future in the new year once we get on back on the water, back into the training environment a little bit more too. So looking forward to that. So as Ryan did mention, you're not the only ones who has some confusion sometimes around what physiologists do and what that difference is between a physiotherapist. They're very similar in the way the words are, but our roles are a little bit different. And so do just want to give a bit of an introduction. I think it's good to kind of have that as we go forward. And I have a little bit more role and involvement with the group. It's great for all of you to have some of that awareness. So really essentially a role for a physiologist and for me with your group is really the understanding of the physiological demands of your sport. So getting an understanding of what your sport demands are, and then how to inform like what characteristics an athlete should have or what you do have to be successful to compete at the highest level that you compete at. So some of those things might involve monitoring some of the adaptations to your training, may include some environmental conditions and how to enhance performance. So on this page here, you have your 4 pillars, and this is these 4 pillars kind of encompass a lot of what in general sports scientists, staff help out with, and what our main kind of purpose and goals are. And so this goes from our nutritionist, the mental performance coaches, the strength coaches, your therapy teams as well. We all work together essentially to help in these 4 pillars to, 1, keep the athletes healthy, enhance training adaptations. So this could be in any way with helping coaches look at the training plans to help focus where those training adaptations can fit. and then where the athletes are adapting. So that's where kind of that monitoring comes in of monitoring how fatigued you are, how you're adapting to some of the training. So that could involve whether it's monitoring heart rates, whether it's monitoring blood lactate measures, or just on water different testing performance measures. So there's a lot that kind of goes into those things. And then that final piece there is the optimizing acute performance for competition. And this one really here is that kind of last piece to that puzzle. Once you have all your basics down of those training pieces, you're healthy. Once you want to get to that next level, that's where some of those kind of optimizing those next steps, intervention. So this could be stuff like using environmental conditions to help increase performance. So I'm sure most of you have heard of different types of altitude training, hypoxic training or hyperoxic training, environmental conditions like using heat to increase performance, or ergogenic aids, all those types of things. Those are kind of that last piece of that puzzle. Once you get to that elite level and you have those basics down, is that kind of next level where we can help out with. But in terms of physiology, I really usually describe it as it's the why underneath a lot of things. So for example, you have a therapy team, you have someone who has some chronic shoulder injuries, let's call it. Often that therapy team will come to the physiologist and ask or get some help in around, well, why is this happening? And that's where we sort of dig into is it in and around training? Is the training volume too high? Is the intensity too much? And then that's where we kind of get into more of the monitoring stuff and adaptation. So that's kind of a big kind of overview of it. So my role with Canoe Kayak right now and some of the areas we're going into is one, helping out with the coaches, and have been doing some work with Ryan, some of the other coaches in around this training prescription piece. But the next step to it, and many of you might have been on the recent call where we were looking at using Training Peaks. So Training Peaks is an area where you guys can all put in track a lot of your data and a lot of your training sessions and how you're feeling. So using that platform for myself and the coaches to help you understand how you're adapting, how you're recovering to your training as well. And then from there, we can kind of make some changes to the program itself, and then where you're going with performance. So that's kind of where we're going. And then future wise too, like Ryan said, some more on the education pieces around some of these topics. But then if we can get back eventually on the water and in the lab, then we could also start doing some more testing to see some of those characteristics that all of you have, and where we can go to enhance your performance and training. So with that, today where we're going to start off with is, I mentioned that we need to have those basics before we can kind of go to that next level of some of the more fun intervention type pieces to enhance performance. So that first piece of the puzzle really is our recovery. So our focus needs to be kind of in and around that recovery, and then how recovery can promote adaptations. And then that goes into those adaptations go right in hand with performance. So with a decrease of recovery, there's maybe some decreases in adaptations, and then therefore decrease in performance, and then vice versa, being on the positive end of things. So that's kind of where we're going to start today, is just dig into this concept of recovery a little bit more. And I know that it's a huge area. There's a lot of different directions and ways we can go with this. So I'm going to try to focus this in and around the training piece, and then a few different of the main kind of strategies that we can use to enhance our recovery. So first going to get into, as I mentioned, that what is recovery and what are the overload kind of training principles to it. And then where can we fit this into our YTP, which is our yearly training plan. And then we'll get into a little bit of the recovery modalities and some of those strategies like I mentioned. And then we'll put it all together in the end. So first, just to kind of look at recovery versus kind of some of those adaptations. So recovery is essentially happening every day, every second, every minute and hour of our day. Essentially, there's some part of us that are recovering if we've gone through any sort of training or stress. Okay, so recovery is essentially happening all day and all night long for us. What that process entails is we're really trying to get our body back to its normal condition and or even better than our normal condition. Okay, so what's happening with this is you're usually putting some sort of training stimulus, which is some sort of stress. Maybe you have your life stress on top of that as well. What we're doing in this recovery phase really is trying to get back to that normal spot. Now I'll get into this a little bit more. And more specifically, kind of on the physiological level, what's happening is we're really our body is restoring and resynthesizing a lot of processes in our body. So if we start with the muscle, really there's a lot going on there in terms of when you've done a training session or there's going to be a lot of breakdown to our, to the muscles and trying to recruit new muscle fibers after that training period. And so during this time, we're really our body is producing, resynthesizing, restoring a lot of these enzymes and the proteins that are helping with that increase in the muscle and fibers. Our energy stores, we know that when we're exercising and training, we deplete a lot of our energy stores. So those carbohydrates, the fats, we're using those as our energy. So those are going to be depleted. And during our recovery phase, it's really our body is trying to restore those and resynthesize for the next, for our body to function, but also in the next training sessions. And then that final piece is your endocrine system and immune system. These systems here are really just part of the whole health of our body. So again, that is trying to restore and resynthesize after you've gone through some sort of stressful period. So how we're going to put all this together is there's ways for us to optimize our recovery, and that usually involves in increasing our rest, using nutrition interactions for that to refuel our body, looking at our training load management. So doing some proper, sorry, this is moving ahead on me, training load management. And then there's those final acute strategies, which we'll get into a little bit. What I want to really dig into first is take a look at how much time we actually spend training versus competing versus recovering. So this is a real example of an athlete, a swimmer, an elite swimmer who looking at their training plan over a year and then a quadrennial. You can see on on this pie here, that little black little sliver is actually the time that we spend competing. So this is very small. You can see it's a small piece of that puzzle of our competing phase. And then even our training, if you go over into the white phase there, that is the time spent. So there's in terms of the overall picture, the time spent in our training and competing is very small compared to what we're doing recovering, which is that big red piece of the puzzle there. So on here, we have what looked like for this athlete about 86, let's call it 87% of this person's time over a day, year, quadrennial. That's how much time we're spending outside of the training period. So if you really put that into perspective and think about it, yes, what you're doing in your training and when you're competing is important, but what you're doing outside of that period as well is probably just as much, if not more important, in order for you to get the adaptations that you need and want from those training sessions. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a visual and understanding of how important that recovery piece and what you're doing outside of training is. So first, just kind of get into the background behind some of the training pieces is what are we actually recovering from? So this is, some of you may have seen this or understand this a little bit, and others may have never seen this, but this is just kind of our a visual of our overall, what we call this overload and rest principle. So when we're looking at training, so we have this, I don't know if you guys can see my cursor or not, but the line in the very middle, and then it's dotted across, that horizontal line is our performance level. Okay, so let's call that our base performance level. What we have with training is we add some sort of training stimulus on your bodies, on yourselves over a period of time. That training stimulus, we know that from that training session, there's going to induce fatigue. There's going to be these things happening at the bottom there. So the fuel depletion, muscle damage, Yes, you may become dehydrated through that session, mental fatigue, all these things are happening. That's kind of your overall fatigue from training, right? What we're trying to do with that training is we're trying to increase our performance level. So with the proper recovery, the proper training stimulus, we get this, what's called this super compensation. So we actually improve beyond what that performance level is, right? So that's what we're trying to see and what we're trying to get. And it really depends on these two factors, the fatigue that you're putting on, and then the recovery pieces on the right there under that line. So we're gonna look at what this graph could look like if we're under recovered. So this is kind of your performance level again. If we induce that fatigue, again, let's pretend your coaches did it perfectly in the training plan. They put the right amount of fatigue on you, but you didn't take the time to do the proper recovery. So instead of during those recovery weeks, you didn't eat properly, you didn't get enough rest, you stayed up late, you went out, you didn't do kind of all these, you had other stressors on you during that time as well. So life stresses happen. This is what that red line here is, what is potentially happening, versus this black line is what we want to happen. So that recovery is going to be pushed to the right. So it's going to take you longer, and you may not even get to that point of increasing your performance. And that all comes down to you did everything right in the training, but if the recovery wasn't there, that's where kind of that you're pushing that that performance either down and to the right. If we have optimal recovery, so here again looking at the proper training, and if we during those recovery weeks and recovery days and times in our day, if we're looking at we're refueling, we're hydrating, we're using all the different strategies we know and sleeping properly, then we can see how that rebound effect happens a lot sooner. So that recovery phase can happen much sooner, and you're going to get that performance increase sooner than you might have if you didn't use any of these strategies like we saw in the last slide there. And the final piece to this here is, what if we don't have the proper training stimulus? So what if we don't actually get enough of the proper fatigue? So we always, with our training and what our coaches are trying to do is we're trying to put the proper amount of stress on you. There's good training fatigue, and then there's bad training fatigue. So when there is times in our training that we want to induce this fatigue more than other times, and to the right degree. Now, if we go through training and we're not doing the total amount or the right amount and intensity to the training that's prescribed, then what we see here is this blue line where you're actually not decreasing into that fatigue enough. So over time, you're just kind of staying at that same performance level. You're not going to get as much of an increase on that performance as you would if the training was properly kind of followed along. All right, so that gives a bit of an overview on the training side of things and what's happening and why recovery is so important. So another piece, this is what I often refer to and use the example of, is our body is a lot like a glass of water. So if you use these glasses on here, think about it is, if we're pouring water into a glass, we know eventually it's going to overflow if we don't drink it or we don't pour some of it out, right? So it's going to continue to overflow. And then when that overflows, water gets absolutely everywhere. It's really hard. You got to use a lot of paper towel or paper to clean it up. So essentially, if we look at this with our body, it's the same thing. If we want to put training stress in, there's going to be the natural life stresses that happen too. But if we don't either take a drink out of that glass or we don't eliminate some of those stresses and have strategies around how to manage our stress and recovery, then we're also going to overflow, right? So our bodies can only take so much stress, whether it's good stress and bad stress. We can only take so much. And so we need to find those ways to recover. Or things that could happen is we'll start to get some injuries, we'll start to get sick. our performance is going to start to decrease, and we'll be fatigued for longer periods than is actually planned in those training phases. So some of you may, as athletes, I often like to have athletes really understand what a training program looks like and why there's recovery and regeneration weeks in there. So what happens is you'll often see in your training programs, and coaches give it to you, there should be a progressive overload or loading in your program. So what that means is you can play around with the volume, and they're going to play around with the volume and intensity, but usually it somehow goes in this progressive increase. And then you'll see that fourth week in there, these weeks are going to change. Sometimes you only have 2 weeks where there's a really high volume or intensity block, and then a recovery. And I'll get to that kind of in the next slide here. But what I want to point out here really is just the fact that these recovery weeks are really important. So a lot of times you'll see the athletes, they really like to feel that fatigue, to feel like you're doing something. But it's in these recovery weeks where we actually make the adaptations from those training periods. So yes, like I said earlier, the training periods here and how much training you do is very impactful, but the adaptations are really coming in these regenerations weeks. So what you're doing in those weeks when the coach says you have a recovery week, what that means is during that week is where you're actually making those gains. Those are the gains that are happening in those weeks. So your body is going through and adapting to, like I said, those muscle breakdowns and all of those things that are coming from training. So what you do here, so what that could include, like I said earlier, what you're doing in terms of your nutrition, your sleeping, your stress during those weeks are really important. So these weeks aren't weeks to just go off and take the week off because you don't have training in the morning. So that means you're going to stay up all night and you're going to sleep in all morning and all day. You're going to eat differently during that week because you think that that's your week to kind of have a lot of cheat meals or whatever it might be for you during that week, when really that's the week where we need to be even more diligent with all of these strategies. So as I mentioned kind of a minute ago here, is that there's different progressions to a lot of these training loads. So it really depends where you're at in your phases of training, in the phases of your careers. There's a lot of things that plays into how your coaches may plan these. So for example, I'm sure many of you on the call are more in the development stages or of your careers. So many of you may be kind of in and around these 2 to 3 week or three big block periods before you get kind of a regeneration. But essentially early on in our careers and early on in our more in our specific prep or like competition phases is where we really need to focus on a lot more recovery. And then in those general prep phases, so early on when you're probably focusing on a lot of that GA1 type of work, that's where there's going to be probably a lot of volume increases. And then once you get there, then you kind of get into some of those recovery weeks. So you can go a little bit longer to the 4 to 6 to 1 ratio of training phases to recovery phases. All right, so that's kind of the big overview of how training and everything fits into why we need what recovery is and why we need it. So we're going to get into now a little bit more on the evidence-based recovery strategies. So what I want you guys to do, I threw it in the chat box of what the most a link to Menti. So if you want to open up that, type in the Menti in your web browser, and then I think I put the code in there too. So enter that code in there. And I have a question on there looking at what is the most kind of effective recovery strategy for you that you guys feel that you use often and that you really feel that works for you guys, and or generally, what do you think the most effective recovery strategy is? And I'll I'll pull that up here. All right, so go to that website, thementi.com, and then put in that code there. And you should be able to, we should start seeing as people do this, the numbers start to pop up. All right. So we got one for sleep. Who else? 2, 3.
I'm only getting the question where it's like, do you think you get enough sleep? But I put in that code. I'm not getting this one.
Okay, that's the second one.
And that happened to me. I just reloaded it and it worked fine.
Okay. But that'll be the next question on there. But so yeah, we got a lot going in here for nutrition and a lot of sleep. Obviously, I think I gave a lot of that away earlier just when we talked about sleep. But for you, like what this could be for you guys, just what you think is most important and effective for you and how that works for you. So as you can see here, obviously a lot of people are tuned in. That's awesome in terms of the nutrition and the sleep here, because those two, as we'll get into a little bit more, are probably the top ones to being the most effective. So if you go to the next one, a few people have already started on this little question here, which is awesome. So who thinks that they get enough sleep in their weeks, months, whatever it might be, especially when you're in and around training? Yeah, we got some 4 yeses here so far, 10, 11. So quite a few going into the no's, and we'll talk a little bit about that and maybe even get some thoughts from all of you in the end in terms of why you think some of that, why you're not getting enough sleep in your days. So yeah, feel free to continue filling that out, and I'll switch back here. All right, so when we get to some of the evidence-based strategies that we're going to use for recovering, as you can see on this pyramid, that base level, the foundation of our recovery, as I've talked about already, is really that stress management through our training, but also with our life balances. So what's happening in our life that is causing that additional stress other than training. So as you can see, as you go up this pyramid, the amount of money that can be spent on strategies, and then the evidence scale. So the highest evidence scale is on this base level and the middle one, and then more on the moderate to low at the top, kind of in those recovery modalities. Those modalities are often usually the most expensive as well. But we're going to focus our time really is in these foundational strategies, which is like you both, or all of you indicated on both of those mentees, is the sleep and nutrition are key. I saw this recently and thought it was perfect, that it's true that often we always look to some of those additional strategies, those top end on that pyramid, those supplements, compression garments, immersions, all these new awesome strategies that give us a quick acute bout of recovery. But what we often fail to look at and think about and just really go back to the basics of the sleep and nutrition and how they're playing into our recovery. And so always a good thing to remember here. So why is sleep, and we'll get into nutrition in a bit, but why is sleep one of the most important and most effective means of recovering? So I'm getting into more the details and the physiology behind what's happening in sleep, but when it comes to sleep and performance, there's a lot of key pieces here that play into our sleep health. So first, our focus, our motivation and drive, strength and power, and our time to fatigue and capacity. So within your sports, obviously these two things are really important: strength, power, and your overall kind of aerobic endurance capacity. They're really important, and they can be very much impacted either on the positive end or negative end if depending what you're doing with your sleep here. And then that final piece, that fifth piece on the left here, is your motor control and learning. So it will also play a major impact on how you're learning, both from in your sport, from a technical perspective, what you've learned at practice or training that day really comes into play when you're actually when you're sleeping. So that long-term retention and motor learning is happening when you're sleeping and not necessarily just when you're training. Same thing goes to your schoolwork. What you've learned in the classroom is actually being retained and really dialed in when you're from your sleep. So what's happening with our sleep, as I've already kind of alluded to a little bit, is from the physiological growth. A lot is happening with our muscle and down to the cell level at sleep because we're completely at rest. It's the only time in our day that we're totally at rest. Our body doesn't have to function to the same level when we're laying down and in sleep. So a lot of the body can kind of resynthesize and do what it has to regenerate for the next day and days beyond. You've all heard the sentence of practice makes perfect, but I would include in there practice and sleep makes perfect, because as I just mentioned, that motor pattern learning is happening during our sleep period. So again, what we're learning throughout our day is really only going to be as effective as our sleep that night. So if you have a really big day of learning or a really big technical session that day, make sure this is a really important piece to that learning day and training session is getting that really good sleep at night. Enhances your memory. So again, if you're trying to study for an exam and you're trying to memorize things and whatnot, that sleep that night and the days leading into it is going to be really important for that memory, to enhance your memory of those topics. Then there's obviously a lot of other things go in there with your reaction time, decision making and problem solving, your motivation, your optimism, your confidence, and just your overall mood. So I'm sure all of you can attest to the fact that when you don't sleep well, your mood worsens. So this is something here to think about in terms of like what's happening in our sleep is it really is regenerating that mental fatigue and our mood and motivation. So again, just with that stress is when we have that mental fatigue. So it could be of multiple effects here with whether it's travel, competitions, you have life stress, whatever it might be, but that poor sleep really plays into this mental fatigue, which is then going to play into your physical fatigue and vice versa. So it is this constant kind of wheel of what's happening both mentally and physically when we have a decrease of sleep and increased stress. So how many hours should we really be getting at night? So there's tons of research out there right now, and it's an area that continues to grow, but just have one published article on here just to kind of give you some background to this, but they've done some research in this project here. They did research looking at athletes who they were in school and university. They looked at them doing 10 hours of sleep a night over a 6-week period versus less than 7. Sorry, this keeps moving ahead on me, but and really what they saw with this is that there was an increase in the athlete's shooting ability, their reaction time, their mood when they increased their overall hours of sleep at night. But one thing I do want to mention with that is that oftentimes as an athlete, you might have one night of bad sleep before a big competition, and that's okay. And that research was showing that even if you just have one night of sleep before a competition that's bad, it most likely won't impact performance to the same degree as if you had multiple nights of sleep debt. So if you have more than kind of a 3-night period of like you haven't slept well at all, that's where you start to get that chronic sleep debt. But just one night is okay, and you can rebound from that pretty quickly. In terms of duration and cold and flu risk, so this is really important, especially right now with everything going on with COVID and illnesses, is making sure we get enough sleep. So that's over 7 hours of sleep really has been correlated in terms of duration. So getting more than 7 hours, so above, usually kind of in and around for elite athletes, is about 8 to 10 hours of sleep. And those odds kind of, you can see with these graphs here is anything less than 7 hours, your odds and risks of injury does increase, and same with illnesses. This is just another article showing similar that anything kind of below that 6 really does have an impact on injury and illness. So what do we know now about sleep? It is important, but why? We know that our body is recovering from stress during sleep. Lack of sleep is correlated with those injuries, and our sleep quality and quantity impacts kind of on that performance, our memory learning, focus, rehabbing from injuries, and overall mood. And you can put in, it does impact depression as well. But what's our reality as athletes, and probably many of you as students? You're going to have early morning training, and it's going to be difficult to achieve maybe some of the hours. And maybe that's one of the reasons why everyone is saying that they don't get enough sleep. So one thing I do want to highlight and encourage is napping is one of the best things that athletes could do. And I know, again, that fits into overall schedules, but there has been a lot of research showing that it can improve memory, reaction time, alertness, especially if you know that you're not getting enough sleep in the evenings, then adding in a quick nap throughout the day can enhance that. So the biggest thing to this is making sure your naps aren't too close to the evening, because then that could be playing a factor into why you're not sleeping enough in the evenings. And you really want to keep those naps to about 30 minutes. So anything more than that, you're kind of reaching into this, you're getting too deep of a sleep, and you're going to wake up even groggier than before. So trying to keep it into this like 20 to 30 minutes, or if you're going to really need to sleep longer. So sometimes when you're traveling and totally exhausted, you can get into more of that, like from 90 minutes to 120 minutes is kind of that next step to that. But anything kind of in between the 30 to 90 minutes is you're going to reach, you're going to be more fatigued waking up than you were.
Mel, we have a question on napping, so I thought I'd bring it up now.
Yeah, for sure.
Haley asked about napping in terms of splitting. Does that count, that 30 minutes, to the overall 8 to 10 hour goal, or is that in addition to that?
So that's in addition to that. And the biggest reason is because when our hours of sleep is how long we're sleeping is going to impact how long we get what's called a REM sleep. And that sleep is where we're making a lot of those kind of memory and kind of cognitive impacts or improvements is during that REM sleep. So if we shorten our overall night sleep to like 6 hours, instead of getting an hour and a half to 2.5 hours of REM, we're only getting, let's call it like half of that. So 45 minutes to maybe an hour of REM sleep. So we're decreasing the REM is impacting how well and our quality of sleep. That makes sense. But where the naps come in is really important, and like how it adds into that overall sleep is if you're waking up, you're not totally recovered, or you had a really tough session in the morning training, that recovery, that 30-minute kind of nap in the afternoon can help with that recovery of that session alone.
And then we just had another nap question come in. What if you have trouble falling asleep and it takes you 20 minutes to fall asleep for that nap?
Yeah, no, that's a good question too. And that I would say that, I mean, that time it takes you to fall asleep wouldn't necessarily include into the nap time. So yeah, maybe if you know you're going to take a long time to fall asleep, what I tend to do is set your alarm for an hour, because then it's going to give you kind of that 20-minute, 30-minute kind of lead in. And then you know that 30-minute time, you'll get a solid 30 to 20 minutes in there. So set your alarm for, let's call it 45 to an hour to give yourself time to fall asleep.
Awesome, thank you. Haley, if we didn't answer your question, if I didn't ask your question properly, you can jump in here.
Yeah, you did. I was just going to ask a follow-up question, actually. Yeah. I don't know if this is like accurate, but like my watch tracks your different sleep cycles. Mm-hmm. And I noticed like like, I don't know, say you can have like several different 8-hour sleeps, but your like REM cycle would change, like how long you're actually in REM sleep. Is there anything that like affects how long you can actually go into that like deep sleep state?
Yeah, so that is a good question. So what's happening with that? So sometimes it could be, what we'll get into is like your quality of sleep. So depending on how, a lot of times those technologies are looking at either your heart rate or they're looking at movement. So a lot of it is like accelerometers, or how much you're moving throughout the night, and then how kind of consistent your heart rate is. They're kind of just basing it and guessing it off those things. So I'd say some are accurate, some aren't as accurate. So you do have to somewhat be careful with those, but as long as you're keeping consistent technology, then that's okay. But I guess some ways to enhance that is like, sometimes is just your overall, what your bedroom in terms of like your environment is. So I don't know if you're someone who wakes up a lot in the night. So maybe it's cold, or maybe you have to go to the washroom a lot in the middle of the night. So it's the how many times you're getting up and kind of moving around and then having to go back to sleep kind of in there. Stress plays another big role in that. A lot of times what I've seen is athletes who are really stressed, kind of just overall life stresses, is that REM, you might not get into that REM as well because you're waking up, and whether you're fully awake or not, you kind of go in and out of this sleep state. So what you do kind of before going to sleep, and I'll kind of try to get into a few strategies of what you can do to help with that. Sorry, I kind of went on a tangent there, but I'll get into some of this, a few strategies soon here for you.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah. So a lot of these questions kind of came in around quality and quantity of sleep. So again, I already touched on like those 8 hours, but really for elite athletes is 9 to 10 hours. We've seen a really big increase in performance. I touched already a little bit on that REM sleep, but the length of our hours of sleep is going to impact our REM sleep as well, which is really important. And then that quality of sleep that I was talking about is really in around kind of how many times do you wake up in the night, in the morning when you're waking up. Are you snoozing? Are you someone who snoozes your alarm a lot of times? And I'll admit I've been at a point, especially when I was younger, I would snooze all the time, but you always wake up a little bit more groggy than you would have if you just would have woke up off that first alarm. And because what's happening there is you're getting back into a sleep, but then you don't fully get into the right kind of range. So you end up waking up worse than if you would have just woke up originally. So there's some different apps out there to help you with that, of like not necessarily the snoozing part, but of waking up at the right time and having like an alarm that's not just like bam, like it's really loud, it scares you almost when you wake up, but an alarm that kind of just is more a bit of a kind of a lead in to slowly wake you up is actually a little bit better for that. And then if you're someone who, depending on, you can monitor how refreshed do you feel in the morning. So again, that's kind of goes back to that quality of sleep. Did you get enough of that REM sleep or not? And how refreshed and do you think you felt there? There was a question about how long does it take you to fall asleep, and we'll get into maybe some ways to help with that, but that will play a role kind of in the length of your sleep as well. So you may be in bed at 10, but you're not actually falling asleep till 11 or 12. That's going to obviously impact that quality and quantity.
Now, a couple of quick questions on that area. There was a question on when is, I'm rephrasing this, but when is the best, is there a time that you should try to go to bed? And this one was before midnight or after midnight, very late to me, but is there an ideal scenario?
Yeah, so this kind of plays right into this next one here, is having the best piece of this would be having consistency. So whether you're an early bird person or a night owl, whatever, everyone does have a bit of a different kind of rhythm in terms of where they function best. So for example, for me, I know I'm an early morning person. I work best in the morning. I need to go to bed early, but some people do go to bed later, and that's okay. but our circadian rhythm really works off of light patterns. So when it gets dark, our body starts to release melatonin to help us fall asleep. And so it really, often it's our body, like I said, it is playing with that light. So if you are what you think as being a night owl, that's okay, but try to keep that consistent. So you're waking up at the same time and you're going to bed at the same time. If you're someone who goes kind of, okay, well, one night I'm going to bed at 12 a.m. and then I'm waking up at 6. The next day I'm going to bed at 10, but I'm waking up at 8. Like if you're switching around your bedtimes and wake times, you're really messing with your circadian rhythm, which is really important. It actually really likes structure, so similar structure. And that's where we're going to function best, is if you keep as much consistency as you can to that. And then that kind of goes and back to the kind of light piece to this is our body, like I said, if you're going to bed late at night, but then you're in a room that you're getting a lot of sunlight into your room, that's going to impact that quality of sleep that next morning too, because our body does react to light and darkness to wake and sleep. And some of those other things for optimizing sleep would be, are we having alcohol throughout, whether it's weekends, weekdays, whatnot? That's really going to play a role in how effective our sleep is. And then same with caffeine. How long before bed are you having any sort of caffeine? So that could be any sort of drink, whether it's coffee or pop or whatever. And then we've all heard, I'm sure, of how technology, so our phones and blue light, plays into our sleep patterns as well. So the more that blue light that we're using, so on our phones, it is going to impact when we can fall asleep, and that's going to push how long we can fall asleep. So if you can, try to decrease your screen time before bed, at least, I mean, the recommendation is 90 minutes before bed, but I know for most that's not going to be realistic, and that's okay. But I actually have some blue glasses here that I use often, and I mean, they're getting better. They used to be really ugly, but these blue light glasses, what they do is really block out the screen light, the blue screen. So you can wear those while watching TV. If you're going to be on your phone, there's also apps that can help decrease the blue light on your apps or computers as well. So a few things there to think about and use. And then that last piece there to optimize is, what does your environment look like? So how dark is your room? So like I said, that darkness is going to help stimulate that melatonin in our bodies, and that's going to help us fall asleep sooner. And then how warm and how cold our room is. We actually want our rooms to be a little bit cooler in the evenings, because what happens are when we're sleeping, our core temperature decreases in the middle of the night. So if we can start that early with the environment we're in, not being too cold, so we're freezing and waking up really cold, but just a natural kind of neutral, cooler environment helps. So again, some more just quick tips on how to improve our sleep habits. I've already mentioned kind of the sleeping and waking at similar times, avoiding the alcohol. The other piece of this is your exercise. If you exercise and do a really intense or like any type of speed work before close to bedtime, this could be impacting your sleep as well. Aerobic work tends to be less impactful to our overall sleep, but it's really that intense exercise that can impact it, how quickly we can fall asleep. I mentioned the environment we're in, but I say here, taking a warm shower before bed. I know that might sounds contradictory to what I just mentioned about our core temperature wanting to decrease in the evenings. But what happens if you do take a warm shower before bed is our body, when we get out of the shower, it's going to quickly try and cool down. So it kind of gives that like contrast a little bit of like having warm, and then it's going to try and decrease it right away. But on the other hand, if you're in a really hot, you're somewhere really hot, let's say you're training in Florida and it's extremely warm, and after training, your core temperature is really high, getting into a cold bath, as as soon as you can to try and decrease your core temperature is going to help improve your recovery and your ability to sleep. Getting ready for bed, what can you do? So doing some relaxation technique stuff. So working with maybe a mental performance coach to help with some relaxation and meditation techniques. Oops. Establishing a routine. So as I said, that our body really likes routine, our circadian rhythm likes routine. So if you can set a routine where it's okay, maybe you are watching something or doing something each night, but you're wearing your blue light prevented glasses. Maybe you're doing some yoga or a little bit of stretching 5-10 minutes before bed, something to really bring that your nervous system kind of down to help stimulate your sleep. And then we've talked a little bit about your sleep environment, but honestly, a lot of times is looking at how comfortable your bed and pillow are. I mean, often we don't think about this. We just have the same bed forever, use the same pillow, but it could be something that you just aren't, the bed and pillow aren't helping your sleep, and it's actually impacting how well you're sleeping or falling asleep. And then really just, again, back to the blue light stuff. This athlete is, he knows I use this picture often for him, but he just, an example of some of the glasses that they've had before. This was a couple of years ago where I had some athletes using them. So as you saw, the ones I use are a lot better now, technology-wise and looks. Last piece of this kind of is in around technology and how we can monitor our sleep and recovery. So I put up here kind of that the training peaks. So what you can do in there is really track your overall sleep quality and quantity, and look at how you're feeling from your motivations, your stresses, and then track if you're getting sick. And then in there, what we can do on the background as myself, Ryan, and the coaches, we can look at this and help you guys kind of figure out, well, are you not adapting to training as well because it's actually your sleep? In that case, then we would reach out to you and your coaches and say, okay, well, what can we do to help you with your sleep? Maybe we can have some further conversations to figure out what it is about your sleep you're not getting. And then same thing with your fatigue levels, stresses, all those things. The more you track it, the better we're going to be able to help support and understand why or why not you're adapting to the training. I threw in a whole lot of other technologies in here, as someone already added that question, is that I'm sure you have, everyone here uses some sort of watch, whether it's an iWatch, Polar, Garmin, whatever it might be. All of these do work in a different way. So I would say just be careful with how you're comparing these to people or different things, because they do work differently. But it is good to at least track and see over time how, like someone asked, what those REM cycles are for you. All right, so really just to kind of end that piece off is there, as I mentioned, is that that sleep really is kind of that foundation in there, and then our nutrition kind of is next. And I'm not going to get into the nutrition because I know Kevin already did it, but really that next step to the nutrition is what are we doing to individualize that in and around our training prescription. So if we're in a really high training volume, what do we need to be doing for that recovery rate after? And like I said, maybe if Kevin didn't touch that the other day, that could be another step to another presentation, is what the details around the nutrition and recovery. For the sake of time, I'm not really going to go into the full details of some of the other strategies, but I do want to highlight that there are a lot out there, and it really just comes down to what you're doing in the basics first. So those sleep and nutrition, and then where we can go with these next strategies. And though I'm going to pull up just a quick kind of visual here for you to see so all the different strategies here on the left that can be used, that athletes have used or there's research on, and then what the evidence-based approach is to them. So if it's a high to the right, it means that there's a high evidence to those modalities, and then to the left, it's less known, even though athletes still use them. It's less kind of impactful on a research standpoint and evidence standpoint. So you can see obviously the sleep is very high, nutrition. That next piece is the active recovery. And then we have kind of the stretching and the cold water immersion being up towards more, there's more evidence to those versus some of these other strategies like Normatex compressions, sort of thing. So again, I'm not going to go into this because this could be a whole nother presentation on its own too, which we could potentially get into in the future, is just how active recovery and cool down can impact between heats, between events, how important that active cool down is to the overall recovery. And again, I'll post these kind of slides, but I won't get into too much. Just this would be just kind of a visual of like how long it could take between heats and events to really recover after a really hard, whether it's a sprint event type of work. So this is just something we could, again, that I would be helping in the future with, if we could on water look at what you're individualizing some of our cool down strategies could be. And finally, just to kind of end it off on this last piece, and I didn't get into a little bit, is more on the mental performance side of things, but what is our psychological recovery? So again, back to that stress management piece, is what are we doing to help decrease kind of that sympathetic activity? So really relaxing and regenerating. So those mindfulness meditations, what can we do? Maybe it's listening to music before bed. So a few different things there that we can start to increase and help with that relaxation for recovery. And then finally, just to kind of end it off here, pulling it all together, as I've said multiple times already, is we want to focus on those basics first, and then we can get into individualizing some of those next step recovery strategies. And with those, what I would always suggest is to trial everything beforehand. And be consistent. So whether it comes to your nutrition, whether it comes to sleep, try to be as consistent as you can with those things. I'm going to leave this here. I'm not going to read it out loud, but I just have a quote from a coach, a really high performance. He's actually coached a lot of Olympic athletes, runners, so athletics. And one of the things that I really liked when he said was, a lot of times athletes think that by not recovering and just doing extra workouts and doing really hard workouts, even though you're in a recovery week, whoops, keep going over here, is often that it's the mindset in and around that you don't think you should be recovering. You need to be doing more. You're not good enough to continue to have that recovery block. So you're trying to catch up to other people in those recovery weeks. But I do want to just kind of highlight there that it's really important that those adaptations, those improvements are actually happening in those recovery weeks. So don't take it as a toughness thing by doing extra workouts on your own or doing extra in those recovery weeks. It's actually is more toughness by sticking to that plan and recovering properly is where you're going to gain those benefits. So I'm going to end that here with those stuff there, and just kind of end it with an action plan for you guys to start thinking about. And that would be first and foremost with our training plans is sitting down with your coaches and looking at what that training periodization looks like. So when are those regeneration weeks, and plan out exactly what you're going to do in those regeneration weeks. So in terms of your training, in terms of life, in terms of sleep, all of those things, try to plan that out just as much as you would plan out a training week. Tracking in your training peaks. So I would encourage everyone to, I've seen a few people starting to use it now, but get into your training peaks and start to track what you're doing, track how you're feeling. So you can put in your metrics of how you're feeling. And again, just working with your coaches, because then on that end, if you guys are inputting some of that information, we can work with your coaches on the other end for those training plans. And the final thing here is you 3 questions. I threw them in the Jamboard if you guys want to throw in some comments or anything in there. Is look at planning or finding one thing in your current pre-bedtime habits that you can change, and then find one thing in your current bedtime habits that you can start doing that you haven't done that maybe you learned about today. All right, I know I took more than enough of your time there, so I'm going to end it there. If there's any more questions that you guys have, you guys either jump off mute. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I'll go. There was a few questions in the chat, and then we'll open it up to any verbal. So one of the questions, the first one is around if you are very fatigued or lack of sleep, what's a good management tool for the athlete and the coach for that given practice if they're not as prepared as they can be?
So this would be an athlete, sorry, just to repeat there. So the athlete comes to training and they are fatigued.
Yeah, they come to training, they didn't get enough sleep the night before.
Yeah. So I would say it depends on if it was just one night of sleep. So if it's just that one night and they're not feeling totally rested is one thing. But if they're saying, okay, it's been a week now and I haven't slept for like 3-4 days, that's where I would take it into a bit more account and really probably adjust that training. So you aren't putting more stress on them in terms of a really hard session. So maybe dial that kind of intensity or volume back that you may have planned for that day. You can still do some activity. You can still do a training session, just decrease maybe what that load looks like. But if it's just one night and it's like, okay, I just had one bad night of sleep, but the rest of my week's been great up to this point, stress in my life is fine, it was just one bad night. In that case, I wouldn't worry about it too much. And it's more just if it was a chronic thing that you could adjust.
Thank you. The next question, I think you answered, when is the latest that you should have caffeine? And you said 4 to 6 hours before your sleep.
Yeah, usually 4 to 6 hours is kind of that turnaround time for caffeine for most people, but that's also very individual. So it's something you'd have to almost trial yourself, but I would give, for the most part, that general rule is 4 to 6 hours. But some people I've seen it where like they can't have caffeine after more than 8 to 10 hours. So again, just it's something individual that you can trial, but I'd for sure err on the side of that 4 to 6 for sure.
Okay, thank you. Next question, how does melatonin affect your sleep cycle quality?
Yeah. That's a great question. So like I said, melatonin is actually naturally produced in our bodies. So, and it gets released with the light cycles in our day. So when it gets darker is when melatonin starts to get released. So what I actually usually suggest is, even if it's still light outside, obviously we have the time change in Canada here. So sometimes it doesn't always fall into place of when we're falling asleep, but try to shut the lights off a little bit earlier in the evening. So if you know you want to try and fall asleep by 10 o'clock, maybe by like 8:30, you're shutting lights off in your living room, in your bedroom, wherever you are. You're throwing your glasses on, those sort of things, shutting kind of the blinds, whatever it might be, if it's still light outside, to help stimulate or increase that melatonin release, because it does help with falling asleep. It's not something you can really, I wouldn't say people measure often, like, oh, how much melatonin do I have? It's if you want to, there is, I'm hesitant to say this, but some people do use the melatonin over the counter. There you can there's like it's like a vitamin type of thing that you can have, and there are some, I think, if you use for athletes, clean athletes, if you look it up with a K, K-L-E-A-N, I can write it in the text after. They usually have some supplements like the melatonin, for example, as it's clean for athletes, it's tested. So that'd be the one I would suggest for anyone. But if you really have trouble sleeping and you're doing everything properly, then you could use melatonin for that, where it's like a few hours before bed, you start to take a bit.
Thank you. Next question. This is probably, this is from one of our university age athletes. The effect of alcohol on recovery. I guess they're asking a few drinks versus chronic, so a lot of high level consumption.
Yeah, it's a good question. don't think I put any papers on here, but I do have a few that I can pass along. Alcohol and even I'll throw in there marijuana both have a pretty big impact on our quality of sleep. So I'm sure some people think that like, okay, well, when I have one drink or I have a little bit of marijuana before going to sleep, it helps me fall asleep. And that might be true. It actually could help you fall asleep, but your efficiency throughout that nights of sleep, you're actually not getting that like full rested sleep as you would. It actually shows that your REM cycle gets decreased. So you don't reach that full REM when you've had alcohol or marijuana. So from an acute standpoint, it doesn't really matter how much you've had, even the smallest amount can impact that REM cycle. And then chronically, obviously it's a lot worse. So that's going to impact your overall cycle, and it'll be a lot harder for you to kind of rebound and kind of, yeah.
Okay, we're gonna do two more, if that's okay, Mel.
Yeah, of course.
The use of supplements, whether they're food or I'm trying to ZMA as aids to go to sleep. What is your sleeping aids?
Yeah, nutrition is a good one, a good question. I know I didn't get into it, but there are definitely some strategies in and around eating that can help stimulate you falling asleep. So again, it depends on your training from that day and how much your volume is and how much you need. But so I'll leave that part to Kevin in the future. But essentially, if your recovery overnight is really important, is having protein before bed is actually going to help you recover and regenerate a lot of that protein resynthesis through the evening. So actually having some sort of milk protein, so that whey protein, is really helpful for the overnight sleep, because it's a longer lasting type of protein. So the milk protein is going to help overnight.
Okay. Thank you, Mel. Last question. We are a sport that traditionally trains early in the morning before school. I think you touched on this already, but maybe emphasizing any strategies for athletes that do stay up late, that are night owls. How do they change that into going to bed earlier, I guess?
Yeah, and I think that's, the biggest thing I'd say, and I actually think as a developing athletes, having that longer sleep is really important. And I know I did it as an athlete, and as through high school and university too, is staying up later to whatever it is, connecting with friends and whatnot. But trying to start a routine and habits to basically going to bed earlier. And I know it doesn't always happen if you're staying up late, studying and all that. So what I would essentially say that if it's something that's you're chronically you're going to bed late and you're waking up early, then introducing more naps into your day. Try to shift and manage your time a little bit better during the day. So look at your schedule and plan it out a bit more. So that maybe you're having dinner sooner so you can do more of your social things earlier, so you can get to bed earlier. So it's really about planning, I think, overall time management so that you can get to bed sooner. But if that doesn't happen, then I would definitely recommend the naps as much as possible in your routine.
Amazing. I think I'm going to end it there. If you do have more questions, don't be afraid to email me, ryanlblair@gmail.com or ryan@ckosprint.ca. Look on our website. My address is all over there. I'll collect those and fire them to Mel, and then make sure you get the responses to that. So I want to thank Mel. This was awesome. Thank you very much. This session will go on our website next week under the webinar series page, so anyone can review it then. And just looking forward, so we do have our final webinar tomorrow. It is more targeted to coaches. Any of the athletes are welcome to join, but it's really kind of optional. We're going to be looking at more data of performance over time from a U16 to U18, and giving you a little more idea of the different standards at those younger ages rather than just that Olympic, Paralympic gold medal times. So if you're interested, you can join at 11 o'clock. Those Ontario team athletes, remember you got to submit your meter and 5,000 meter run, walk, roll times by tomorrow, please. And if you haven't submitted your Ontario team documents, please do so. So anyone else that's on the call that's not on the Ontario team, that is the 1,500 5K is our December challenge. So you have till the end of the year, the end of the month, to add those. So again, if you have questions, please send it to me. But I think that's it for now. If I don't see everyone tomorrow, or I hope everyone has amazing holidays. Get some rest, get some recovery, so that you're prepared to back training again. So thank you again, Mel. You rock. I appreciate it.